Okay, how we doing? Today we're going to talk about valve adjustment, and we're going to talk about the effects of a valve that's out of adjustment. And so many things could make a valve go out of adjustment. Sometimes just the car may need a valve adjustment, whether the lash is excessive or the lash is too tight. It affects the engine in different ways. It affects the waveforms we're going to see on the scope in different ways. So basically, here's our setup here. That's our screen. That's what it's going to look like. That's a solid screen. I'm going to do 5 different scenarios. I'm going to do this thing in one shot in real time. Basically, the first waveform is going to be normal. We're going to look at in-cylinder waveforms on cylinders 1 and cylinders 3. We're going to have a piezo delta sensor on the intake and a piezo FLS sensor in the tailpipe. Believe me, it's there. We're going to talk about the effects of a loose valve and a tight valve. A loose valve, as it rotates, as the camshaft rotates, will open later and close earlier and affect overlap. It will decrease overlap. A tight valve, as you look at that, and as the camshaft rotates, it will open the valve earlier and close it later. Tight valves will increase overlap. We will look at overlap on the scope, and we'll look at expansion pockets, we'll look at compression towers, we'll look at vacuum pulls. Just want to talk about our setup here. I will make adjustments on the run. There are the filler gauges and the Honda tool. I'll be turning the engine by hand. I will adjust the valves. I would change the valve lash on cylinder 1 during this presentation. Cylinder 3 will be our comparator cylinder because we have a transducer in that cylinder also along with cylinder 1. Just want to talk about so many things that affect valve overlap and when valves open and close, not just the fact the car may need a valve adjustment. Just take a look at the list right here. It may need adjustments, a cam to crank correlation, a worn cam lobe, a worn rocker, a loose rocker, a worn valve stem, a worn lifter, shift cam lobe. If a cam lobe walks on a camshaft, that can happen. Recessed valves, loose rockers. You could probably add to this list. Anyway, also don't discount the wrong parts. I've seen that where somebody Frankensteins a push rod, and it's a 32nd of an inch short, and that will really cause a scenario. Anyway, if you look at our screen here, we've probably seen this in another video. That is our time sheet. That is a firing cycle. Basically, EO is when the exhaust valve opens, usually about 40 degrees before bottom dead center. Then the intake valve opens, then the exhaust closes, and then the intake closes. That will change. There are many variables that can change that. It could be variable valve timing. It could be something worn. Basically, going to the left as the events happen sooner, that is advancing. To the right is retarding. That little shaded area is the overlap, and that will change. And we will watch that. The first capture I will do everything normal, okay? The valves are adjusted fairly decently. I probably could split hairs and make a better adjustment. Nonetheless, we will take a capture and we'll measure what normal is, and we'll document that. Then we'll take 4 more scenarios. First scenario being intake valve too loose, then the intake valve too tight, then the exhaust too loose, then an exhaust too tight. We'll look at the way those 4 different situations affect our scope readings. As I said, we're on 4 channels, and here we go. We're going to the scope, and we will get the scope running. We will get the everything going. I will start the scope, and this is a normal situation. This is before I do any misadjustments on the valves, and we will look and analyze and take a look at what it looks like. Okay, I will crank it about 8 seconds. Okay. Okay. We will stop the scope and analyze and take a look at everything in particular. Let's look at a firing cycle. Blue is cylinder 1, red is cylinder 3. Let's look at the compression in cylinder 1, how much our tower is. We're looking about 189 on the blue cylinder. Cranking compression, the red cylinder, about 180, about 190, fairly close. Our vacuum pulls look fairly uniform. We say one little odd guy right here, but nonetheless, we don't see any outstanding anomalies on our vacuum pulls. Our exhaust looks fairly even. We may see a slight anomaly on black. Nonetheless, keep an eye on this. This is our overlap period. I want to measure that. I'm just curious to what that is on this, because I want to make a basis of should we make an adjustment if that will affect our overlap. So we're looking at 720 crank degrees, and I'm going to measure the overlap for cylinder 1, because that's the cylinder we're going to be concentrating on. That would be about right here. That's when the intake valve would open for 1, and here is where the exhaust valve closes. So I'm going to document that, and that is about 35 milliseconds and 51 degrees. I'll write that down. Okay, 51 degrees overlap, 31 milliseconds. That's normal. Let's see if that changes as we make adjustments to this this vehicle. I will do everything in real time. So just basically, you want to just roll ahead in this video. Let me get it back to the normal screen, and we will I will make an adjustment, and I will increase the lash on cylinder 1, and we'll crank it over and take a look at what that looks like. Anyway, just freeze the video and go ahead. I don't know, I'm not the fastest guy in the world. Go ahead 2.5 minutes and try to find a sweet spot when we're back in business. So I'm going to get ready with the tools and start making an adjustment. Ready to make an adjustment, but I want to discuss something which I missed. Let me make sure I'm at top dead center, which I am at top dead center on the cylinder 1. We'll make an adjustment. I just forgot to talk about something. I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about expansion pockets. I want to get in here and kind of look at these guys here, and let's look at the depth of our expansion pockets. We'll consider that normal. Okay, so as far as this is cylinder 1. We haven't made adjustments yet. Okay, our lowest pocket, we're about minus 4.5 psi, and our red guy, we're about minus 4.1. I'm going to write them down so we have a baseline. Okay. Blue is minus 4.5, and red is minus 4.1. If we double that, that's inches of vacuum. So anyway, we'll kind of baseline that. I wanted to get that before I made an adjustment. We will look at those situations with the 4 different scenarios on the valves. I will make the adjustment right now and get back with you. Okay, there's the tool right there, Honda tool. Okay, so now we have slack in our intake valve. On cylinder 1, we will take a capture and see what that looks like. And I will crank it about 8 seconds and we'll analyze it. Okay, let's take a look and take a look where we are. Okay, this is cranking. Looks like, yep, we definitely have a situation. Let's look at a fire cycle. What do you know? Right off the bat, we know about our blue guy. It's got more compression. And we can definitely see that. And I'll measure compression on both. Okay, wow. We're about 218 on blue. And on red, we are about 195. And I will explain the reason why that is. I will establish the timeline on blue. We will look at 720 degrees of crankshaft rotation from the moment blue is at top dead center. And we can talk about, put some rulers in here. Okay, basically the high compression is a result of the intake valve closing early. Remember we said with a loose intake valve, as it rolls around, it opens later and it closes earlier. The earlier the intake valve closes, the piston has that effective volume or is able to push up more to create a higher tower, higher compression than red. So that I just want you to explain that. Also, the little dipsy-do in blue right here, that is a result of our intake valve opening later because there's more slop in that intake valve. And as the cam rolls around, it opens later. It has that effect. As far as overlap, we will notice that a loose valve will decrease overlap. And I will measure the overlap. This is the first time I've done this. I'm not on our cylinder 1 that has excessive intake lash, and that is. Okay, that is 34 milliseconds and 50 degrees. Not much of a change. I don't know how effective that is at measuring overlap. It's not really I don't know, I'm just kind of seeing if it is an effective method. Nonetheless, it's just something to consider. This section right here is our overlap. Right up, see it's in line with that intake. It's when the intake valve opened late and the exhaust valve closed in this area. Nonetheless, let's get this out of here and talk about our pockets. Let's look at our expansion pockets compared to the cylinder with the excessive intake valve. Pocket went down to -2, and our normal cylinder 3 went down to -4, and there's a reason for that, because the fact that we had higher compression on blue because of its intake valve closing earlier will make that cylinder have a less of an expansion pocket. The reason is those pistons have to travel the same amount of distance. Blue, actually starting out at top dead center, has a higher pressure. So in traveling the same distance, the red will get into a vacuum sooner and have more pull on it to get a deeper expansion pocket. Anyway, as far as our vacuum waveform, let's take a look at that. We can see we got a pretty pointy guy here, and it's a little high, and you can see right here our vacuum pull is long here. Right when our intake valve opened up is right here, and I'm going to explain the high pointy situation on our vacuum pull. The intake manifold is dependent on the pistons going down on their intake spokes to create vacuum. And in a case like this, with the intake valve opening late, it's almost as if the manifold is saying, I'm waiting for vacuum, waiting, and it started to drift high. Right here is when the intake valve opened, okay, and bingo, it pulled right into a vacuum. It got a long vacuum pull because at that point, the intake manifold was open to the combustion chamber with the piston going descending. So nonetheless, that is our situation where we have that high anomaly on the vacuum pulls. So anyway, I will go to our next scenario. I will make the cylinder have a lack of intake valve lash. I will make the intake valve tight, and then we will look what that one looks like. Anyway, here we go. Okay. Man. My light. Filler gauge. Okay, we are tight on that one. Let's see what we look like when we crank it about. Start the scope. Get out of the zoom mode. Get this guy out of here. Start it. We still rolling. Okay. Okay. Okay, that is a very tight intake valve on cylinder 1, so let's analyze that. Wow, something's looking weird. Okay, alrighty, let's get into our first comparison is we have, well, let's talk about a tight intake valve. A tight intake valve is going to open early and it's going to close later, okay? So let's kind of get into a fire cycle for cylinder 1. We'll set our 720. This is an excessively tight intake valve on cylinder 1, which is blue. It looks like it lost compression. It's probably lower, about 144, which is substantially lower compared to the 190 in the normal situation. Our good cylinder is about 191, right? Look at our vacuum pull. Look at our anomalies. Oh, okay, hold it. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. Look at our, basically, let's look at green. Green is definitely an anomaly, okay? So if we look at let's look at a fire cycle for blue. We're going to concentrate on blue. We're going to use red as a comparator. So this is, okay. So this is a fire cycle for blue with a very tight intake valve. So what do we know about the vacuum pulls? We know that the vacuum pull for this cylinder, this would be the running mate of 1. So this is the pull for 4. So it would be 1, 3, 4, 2, 1, 3. Okay? If we notice, here, right, the green has a very, very, very weak pull as the cylinder's coming up on compression. There's a reason for that, and I'll explain it. It'll make more sense. The fact that the intake valve is loose, that as the intake cam rolled around, it opened the valve later and it closed it sooner. I'm sorry. This situation, our intake valve is tight. My bad, our intake valve is tight. So as the intake lobe rolled around, it opened the intake sooner and it closed it later. Being that the intake valve is closing later, the piston is for cylinder 1 is starting to come up on its compression stroke, and that intake valve is late to close. So some of that pressure is going to blow past the open intake valve into the intake manifold. It's going to kind of rip off cylinder 3, which is on its intake pull, and create less of a pull. So that was why we see such an anomaly on green. And that is actually for cylinder 3. So sometimes the misadjusted cylinder can affect a vacuum pull on another cylinder. As far as our black, I don't want to analyze that. All I know is that overlap is affected, and when overlap is affected and an intake valve is too tight, we get an increase of overlap. So in this area right here is the overlap area, we would be increased. So let's go into our next situation and look what that looks like. We will get the intake valve back to normal, and then we will go and work on the exhaust valves. So anyway, I'm going to end this video here because I want to do the exhaust valves in a second video, but nonetheless I will be back with a part 2. I thought I can do it one shot. I'll be back with a part 2 where we will affect the clearance on the exhaust valves, making them have too much clearance and being too tight. Anyway, thanks a lot. Signing off.